Hello, everyone. My name's Heather, and I'm from Virginia. I've been with Wales for about 3 years now. Oops. So we'll start off with mastering teacher talk time, and then a little bit on time management, correcting students, and then we'll have time for question and answer. So we all seen Charlie Brown, the teacher, wah, 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 wah. We don't want to sound like that. So it can be really hard. Sometimes we're really enthusiastic about a subject and we just want to explain everything to the students, but we want them to speak as much as they can. That's why they're there. So how can we do this? One way is with peer-to-peer questions. So how can we do this? We can do this during the vocabulary review. So if, let's say the word is destroy, we don't have to read every definition there on the PowerPoint. We can maybe start off with one and then have the students ask each other questions about that. Sometimes they might have a little bit of a hard time getting started with that, so you can give them little cues like, Johnny, why don't you ask Jim a question about the picture? Maybe it's a puppy chewing on a shoe, and you can ask the student to ask a question. What is the puppy doing to the shoe? Have you ever destroyed anything? Try to get them to ask questions to each other. Another thing we can do is let them pretend to be the teacher, and they really like this. So we can do this during the reading, and there are questions that we can ask them, but we can just go ahead and say, all right, student Johnny, you are going to be the teacher now. So they get a kick out of it. Sometimes they like to imitate me, and they ask each other questions, and it's really amazing. They come up with some really good questions, so it gives you a chance to kind of gauge what your students know, and then they get to discuss the story. It becomes fun to them, and they can go back and forth, and you can just let them be the full teacher. Teacher Johnny, is that the right answer? Is that what you're looking for? And they'll say yes or no, so they really have fun with that. We can also, before explaining a new topic, see what the student already knows. So maybe the subject that we're going to speak, the reading, the book is about a fantasy. So instead of saying, okay, this story is a fantasy, fantasies are blah, blah, blah. So we can say, okay, this story is a fantasy. Johnny, what can you tell me about fantasies? So you see what they already know. And then the next student, you can ask them, okay, can you tell me about your favorite fantasy book? And a lot of the students will say Harry Potter or My Weird School, whatever their favorite books are. And you can ask them, okay, why is that a fantasy? So now they're explaining to you what they know. All right, next up is time management. This can be really hard. I think we've all been there where we've either gotten maybe halfway through the lesson and we realize we have about 5 minutes left. Not a good feeling. Or the opposite, where we've gotten pretty much through all the slides and we have like 20 minutes left. So either way, we really have to focus on making sure we stay on track. So one way is to know your class and to be prepared. So with knowing your class, are they chatty or are they shy? That's really going to change the dynamics of your time. If you have a bunch of chatty students, they want to give all their personal experiences, explain all the pictures, which is great, but it makes you run out of time really quickly. So for that, students like that, I will limit our introduction time and also cut back a little bit on the vocabulary because I know we're going to spend more time with the discussion. And then if they're shy, it can be a little hard. Sometimes you might have two students in the class that are both really shy. So when it comes to peer-to-peer questions, they might just say no. Or they might say the question that's already printed on the page. And so it makes it a little hard. Or they might be just shy and just have take a longer time to come up with what they want to say or come up with a question. So you have to gauge the time for that. And then also, what is the class size? So sometimes, most classes are 2 students, but there are some classes that are one. And so if you have 2 students, you want to save some time for the interaction. But if it's 1 student, then you can spend longer on asking them to share experiences and expanding on the story, vocabulary. And then also we want to think about the students' needs. So each class is very different. You might have some classes. I have one class, the boy likes to ask about every word he doesn't know, which is great, but there's a lot of words he wants to ask about. So I know that I need to save a lot of time for our discussion. Or maybe the students really prepare, and so they don't generally have a lot of questions. They ask each other great peer-to-peer questions, so they go through quicker than you might think. So you can just gauge where to spend your time for classes like that. Each class is very different. And then preparation. We have to really become familiar with the lessons and the reading material. For the lower level wonders, it's very different from the higher level wonders classes. We have some lessons that the stories are very short. So it gives us more time to focus on the story, but then we have a few vocabulary words. But then with the higher G level classes, you might have a longer story and a lot of vocabulary words. So you have to become familiar with the lesson and then try to figure out where you want to focus your time. So a good way to manage your class is to have goals for where you're at. So for greetings and introductions, you can spend about 3 minutes. The big idea and the essential question about 3 minutes. Vocabulary and phonics, 10 to 15 minutes. And then the reading, 15 to 20 minutes. Grammar, 5 minutes. Writing, 5 minutes. So you have the flexibility with classes. If you need to spend more time on the reading, you can shave off a little bit from phonics or a little bit from grammar, just knowing your class. And then be flexible. Sometimes you might think that a student's going to have all these questions, and they don't. They were very prepared. Or sometimes you think they won't have questions on a certain topic, and then they have a ton of questions. So you have to just be flexible as the students present their needs. And then last is with correcting students. So a lot of times, right as soon as a student makes a mistake, I'll say what the correction is, and generally, automatically, they go ahead and repeat it. But not always. Sometimes they don't like being corrected, so they'll just ignore me. So I make it kind of a group exercise for those students. I already know they don't like to be corrected, so when they're done reading, I'll just highlight all the words that they had a little bit of trouble with, and then I'll say, okay, these are some difficult words. Let's practice it as a group. And so I'll say it, and I'll have them all repeat it. And then we'll usually go through each student to get to say it. That way the student who had a little bit of difficulty doesn't feel as shy about it, and they get to hear me say it as well as their classmates say it, and then they feel a little bit more confident to say it correctly. Also, we can remind students of phonics strategies discussed in the past. So maybe they are saying a word in the story, maybe hide, but they say Heidi. They're pronouncing the E. So I might say to them, okay, for this word, do you remember the rule about I consonant E? What happens to the I? Is it long or is it short? They'll think about it. They'll say, okay, yeah, it's long. Right, and so the E doesn't make a sound. So can you try that again with a long I sound and no E? And then they'll say it. And it just helps them to remember that strategy. And then also we can have the students correct themselves with multiple choice. Maybe they're telling something from their personal experience during the discussion. So maybe they say, he hitted me. So we can say, okay, do you think it should be he hitted me or he hit me? And I'll usually write it on the screen. And a lot of times when they see it written and they see a choice, then they choose the correct answer. Oh, I should have said he hit me. And so that way they're involved. They don't feel too bad about the corrections, but it sinks in with them. They get it. And now we have a little time for question and answer. if anyone has any questions. Yes?
Let's say that you have two students that you feel like one is a little bit more advanced than the other one. Then how do you usually handle trying to make sure that you still include those students for your
Yeah, that can be a little challenging. So I'll try to have the student that's a little more advanced kind of be my mini teacher, which they like. So the student who's having a harder time is usually the student that tells me, I don't have any questions, or they don't want to pretend to be the teacher. So I'll say, okay, well, think about it, but I'm going to have teacher, the more advanced student. Teacher Johnny is going to pretend to be the teacher, and then they will explain it. Or if there's something that the student who's having a little bit of trouble with, maybe phonics or multiple choice, I'll ask the student who's a little more advanced to explain it to them. Ask them what do they know about the subject and have them help the other student. Mm-hmm.
Let's say they're a little more beginners and often their pronunciation is not so good, and so there are a lot of corrections to be made, but you want to have a nice balance of not discouraging them and taking 20 minutes of their class correcting all the words they said wrong. Hopefully it's not like that, but sometimes it is.
Yes.
So how do you balance like time management as far as spending your class time correcting one of these students?
That can be hard too, because we don't want to discourage them by correcting every single time they make a mistake. So I try to look for patterns. If it's maybe the phonics practice that we worked on this class or a couple classes before, I'll try to work with them on those. Maybe if it's saying ED, pronouncing that sound a lot, or maybe not pronouncing an N sound like S, or maybe using a different tense, then I'll just try to focus on that for that class, knowing that we're going to get to different strategies later on, so not to make them too overwhelmed.